video in this new tutorial series that I'm creating. In it, we're going to be creating a mobile camera setup similar to ones you could be using in games like League of Legends, Diablo, or Dota, those type of games. But um, in here, we're just going to be doing the setting up the couple of the classes. But in the series, we're going to be creating a custom editor that will go along with the scripts we create for our camera. So we can easily edit the values and have the editor actually set up the camera for us. But anyway, let's get started and start creating this project. First off, I'm going to be creating our folders. Create our Moba Camera initial folder, which everything will be tossed into. Inside here, we're going to have our scripts. And for future use and later scripts in this tutorial, we'll also have an editor folder here as well. So before I get into the scripting objects, over here in the hierarchy, we're going to be having a setup for our camera that's kind of unique, or which will make some of our tasks later on a little bit more easy. So we're going to create a couple of empty game objects. You don't have to do this if you want to follow along, but first off, we're going to have a pivot game object, a offset game object, and we're also going to be using a camera, which will be its own game object. But the way we have this is we're going to have them parented to one each another. So the camera is going to be parented to the offset, and then the offset is going to be parented to the pivot. So we're going to have this strange setup of this. For our camera anyway, if we had everything at 0, our scripts are actually going to mainly edit the pivot and the offset game objects. So we can attach other scripts to the camera later on to modify how it reacts or how we want it, like to add a camera shake or have the camera look at something, and it won't interfere with our other script. So in our script we're going to be making, if we move our offset backwards away from the pivot, we can have this pivot object change and rotate around, and the offset is always going to be a set value, like up here in the transform in the inspector. We can change that and it'll go back and forth. That will make our zoom really easy to implement later on. Also, we're going to be having our pivot rotate on the Y like I was doing earlier to rotate the camera around. Though we're not going to actually be rotating the pivot on the x-axis or the z-axis to kind of change the camera around. We'll actually be calculating to move our offset around to rotate, so it makes it easier, and our pivot is always facing forward and it's flat on the plane. But anyway, with that, let's jump into editing our camera setup. So I'll just I'll just do a new scene. Don't save. Okay, in the script, we're going to create our new folder. No, not folder. Script. My bad. We're going to create a new script. And I'm going to be calling this Moba Camera Motor. And also, I'm just going to be creating our two scripts for now so I can kind of explain what we're going to be doing here. We're also going to have Moba Camera Input. So we have these two scripts. The Moba Camera Input will be creating into an abstract class that will be handling all the input from the user and how they're applied to our motor. So in the input, it will automatically grab the motor and automatically update it every frame. So we have that, and we just have to override a set method. Our motor will be taking all the values that are set from the input and calculating how the camera will move and how it will react to those inputs. So in this tutorial, we're only going to be covering a small section of the motor, since nothing we're doing in it right now will be affected by the inputs. So let's open up our motor. And in here, our motor is going to be a mono behavior, and we can remove everything for now and just start fresh. So we'll be creating 3 private variables, a private transform, and this will be our pivot. And we'll just set this to null, and a private transform, and this will be our offset. Our camera in here, we could go with a transform, but for simplicity's sake and grabbing variables later on, we'll do our private camera and just call this camera. So down here, we'll want to create our 3 properties for each of the values that we just created. I'm just going to just go quickly type all these out. We got transform pivot, and we'll do our getters and our setters. And I'm just gonna copy paste, make this go quick and fast. Camera down here, and this is gonna be offset. Copy paste the offset down here. Now for this camera, since camera is the name of the class, I'm not gonna have camera over here for the proper name as well. I'm gonna change this into target camera, because this is a camera that we're gonna be affecting by the motor. If you want, you could also change this private variable to underscore target camera, just so the names match. Now, the next part in this, we're going to be creating our awake method. So I'm just going to go with private, since I don't want any other scripts to access this. And inside this awake, we're going to do 2 things. We're going to first check if any of these components are missing. If they are, we're going to output some debug text and warning the user that they're missing. Second, if they are there, we're going to assign them all these components in the correct parent, give them their parents in the correct order. So target camera would be parented to offset, and offset would be parented to pivot. So let's get down that. So first off, so if not pivot, so pivot is not null, or if pivot is null, actually let's rewrite this and make it a little bit simpler. If pivot equals null, or offset equals null, or even camera equals null, we're going to enter here, else we'll do something else later on. And then in here, just some string editing. We're going to do string missing, and just set this to empty string. This will be all for each of these components that's actually missing. We'll do if pivot equals null, missing plus equals pivot. Now, to make this a little bit more readable, I'm going to do a little fancy trick here to add a comma, just in case, if something before it is there. Actually, for pivot, we don't need it because, well, it's the pivot, it's the first one. And if that's missing, there's nothing before it. We'll do it for the next ones. Offset equals null. Oh yeah, one more thing in this pivot. If the pivot is missing, the script can't function correctly. So we're going to just disable the script. So we'll just set it to enabled to false. Next here, we'll go missing plus equals. And in here, we're going to do our little ternary operator and do missing equals empty. So if it's empty, we're going to do, well, if it's empty, we're not going to add anything. But if it's not empty, we're going to have at a comma with a space with the word offset. And we're also going to go this enabled equals false. And I'm just going to copy paste this so we have the camera as well. Now down here at the bottom, I'm just going to copy paste something I already have on the side. And this will just be our quick warning that'll say, hey, these things are missing. And I'll tell them to add the objects that are required under the tab Moba Camera Script in the inspector, which we will get to, and that's going to be in our custom editor. Now the next section, down here in the else. So in here, we determined that there's nothing missing. So we're going to just say offset, offset dot parent. We're going to check if the offset's parent is not the pivot. And if it is not the pivot, we're just going to assign it to the pivot. And then we're going to do the same with the target camera and its parent, which should be, oh yeah, target camera is the camera, so we have to dot into the transform to get the parent. And this should, if it's not the offset, we're going to assign it to offset. So target camera dot transform dot parent equals offset. And that is all we need to do in the awake. So for now, this is all we're going to have in our camera motor for this tutorial. And our next step is going to be going and creating the custom inspector for this class. So back to Unity, and in our inspector folder, or editor folder, we'll create a new script, and we'll be calling this Moba Camera Motor Inspector. And since this script is going to be using the editor class from the Unity editor namespace, so in order for it to function correctly, it has to be inside an editor folder. So let's open this up. And a few things we're going to be changing. We're going to go using Unity editor. And we're also going to add using system.collection.generic, so we have access to a few things there. Now, to make this class here work as an inspector, we're going to clean it up. First off, we'll take out the methods. We need to change it inheriting from mono behavior into editor. As well as we're going to add a attribute to the class called custom editor. And we're going to pass it the type of, and this will be the type of the class that we want this editor to function with. So Moba Camera Motor. So now this editor will override or be used instead of the base editor for our Moba Camera Motor class. Inside here, we're going to do a public override, and we're going to be overriding the void on inspector GUI. So we're overriding the inspector GUI call from the base and removing the base call. So in here, we'll be adding all our own scripts or code to pretty much make the inspector look however we want it to. And here, I'm going to be, the first thing is, later on, we're going to be extending this even more. So we're going to have a couple fold down sections inside our editor that will hide and show different parts of the script. So first off, I'm going to do editor GUI layout. And we're just going to add some space on either end of what we're working with. And in here, we're going to be calling GUI layout.toggle. And this requires a Boolean value, what we want on our toggle, and some other options. So for this bool value, we could just type in anything. For now, we're gonna do true so we can finish this statement, but we'll be adding a way for this to save. We'll go required, because these are the required components. And also, I'm gonna add a editor style to this just to change up how it looks. Toolbar, let's see, what was it? Toolbar button. You can play around with these styles to get different layout items or elements to look differently. You can find certain ones that work well with each other and give a good result. But okay, back to this value. So I'm going to save this value. So when the user goes from one game object to another and the inspector changes between those, I want to save the state of this value. So when they come back, it'll be the same. So up here, I'm going to be creating a little bit of a hack, but it's a good strategy for this. So we'll create we're going to create a static public bool. I'm going to call this required foldout. And this will be the value we'll use down here. So we can just copy, paste, and toggle returns the changed value. And this is going to be an error for now. But we're going to do get. And in here, we're going to have to, actually, let's do the setter first. Set. So in here, we want to set the value that we get, or that is passed to here. So in here, we want to call the editor prefs. This is how we'll be saving these values. We'll have set bool, and I'm going to add a long key here just so it doesn't interfere with anything else. And I can add later, so I'll do camera inspector required foldout. I'm going to copy this string just because I'll need it in the getter as well. And the value we're going to be saving is just value, since it's the setter method. And that's what our setter is going to look like. Our getter, we're going to return, and I'm going to go editor prefs dot get bool. And in here, I'm going to paste this key that we were using. And then the get also has a default value. What default value do we want this to return? We want it to return true, because if it's the first time the user's created using our window, we want it to actually display all the information possible. So they can hide it if they want to later on. But for starters, display it all. So down here, now that we have our required foldout bool property working correctly, we'll want to toss in an if statement. If required foldout, we're going to call some code. So in here, I'm going to step out of this for 1 second and create another method. Down here is going to be where a lot of our actual code is going to be functioning. And it will be called static public void display required GUI. So this will display the GUI for the required elements. And what do we need for this? We need a Moba Camera motor, and I'll just call this target. And let's call this. So display required GUI. Now, what do we pass to this? We want to pass a Moba motor, but what is it? So our editor has a property or a variable called target. I'm just having these names so we know it's all the same thing. But the editor target is an object. It's not our Moba Camera motor yet. So we need to typecast it. So this will typecast our target and pass it to our GUI correctly. So in here, our target's correct and it's the right class. So we don't have to do any conversions later on. And it makes it a little bit easier to read, in my opinion. So our next step, in our display required GUI, we're going to start filling out our elements. So we can go editor GUI layout dot object field, because object field allows us to drop classes and other objects into the field. We'll just call this pivot and go target dot pivot. And let's see, do I have any? Oh yeah, this also requires additional information. I believe we want the object type. This will be of transformation. This will limit what can be dropped into this object field. And then also the last one, which is a bool to allow scene objects. And we want scene objects to be able to be placed here, because most of this editing is going to be within a scene. And then we can copy paste this twice and change it to offset and camera. Oops, target camera. There we go. And we want to change the type of to camera over here for the camera field. Now, we want to save the changes of these. So these object fields return an object that is set there when it's changed. So we can do as transform, and as camera, and fix this from track reference to transform. And these return a value. Now, you might be thinking you might want to type target.pivot here, but I'm going to be changing this, or I want to do it a different way. So we can, so we can save these changes to our object easier. So we're going to do var and get, I'm just going to hold this new pivot equals. I'm going to do this for each of these, new offset equals, and var new camera equals. And these will get these values. Now, we want to check when these values change. So there's a nice little editor method that we can use. We'll call editor GUI dot begin change check. And then we want to close this off with a editor GUI dot end change check. These method calls will check if any of the GUI elements have changed or have been modified between these two calls. And if something has, this end check returns a bool. So we can toss this into an if. So if end check is true, so something has changed, we're going to be modifying and saving our mobile camera motor. So in here, we'll be first we'll do our assigning of our value. So target pivot equals new pivot. Target dot offset equals new offset, and target dot camera target camera equals new camera. Now, two things. First off, we're going to add the ability to undo these changes. So to do that, we'll want to go undo dot record object, and we'll pass it in the target, because that's the object we want to record. And then we will also just give it a name of the undo action, and we modify Moba Camera requirements. Yeah, that'll be easy enough. Now, there's that. So this will record the object instance when we call the undo. And during the next frame, whatever changes we make after this call, Unity will check the differences between the object it records at this call and at the start of the next frame, and then save those changes, and then you can undo them at any time. Also, when you're modifying an object in the editor and you make changes to its value, you want to set it to dirty, or set the dirty flag on the object. This flag is used by Unity internally to tell when an object needs to be saved. So to do this, we'll just do editor utility dot set dirty, and we'll just pass it the target, and that's all it will do. And this will allow us to go in and modify the pivot, offset, and the camera. So let's go jump back to Unity real quick, and we will check out our progress so far. So if we toss Moba Camera Motor onto an empty game object, and I just chuck this over here, we should get this required. And it looks fabulous. Though, one thing I saw is that this was reversed. It was like this when we first opened up. It should be opposite. But it's good enough for now. And then you can see your objects fields here. We could like pass in the main camera in here and this. And all that's good and dandy. But do we really want to toss this in by hand? Well, not really. We'll make our lives a little bit more easy. Let's jump back into the inspector. In here, we're going to add 2 buttons. So if GUI layout dot button, and this one's going to be our auto generate. This button will allow us to just generate all of the required components straight as we want. And I'm also going to give this a little style. This is going to be editor styles dot mini button. And in here we'll be calling a method in a bit. We'll also add a if GUI layout dot button, and this is going to be generate from main camera. Because the difference between these 2 calls is going to be the first one, the auto generate, will create a new camera as well as the other objects. The generate from main camera will just use the main camera instead and then generate the other objects. And these will only be assigning if the object has not already been assigned. So if the pivot is not null, it won't create another pivot and such like that. So down here, we'll create 2 new static public methods. So generate auto. This will take a Moba Camera Motor and target. And I'll also create a static public void generate from main camera. And this will also take a Moba Camera Motor target. And I'm just going to toss these into which buttons, passing them their correct information. So those are all tied and linked correctly. So the generate from main camera is going to be really easy to create. So first we're going to take our target camera, and we're going to assign that to camera.main. And then once we have that set up, the way our generate auto works, if something is not null, then we're not going to create a new one. So we just set our camera to that, and then we can just call our generate auto, and then it will do the rest of the work for us. So in here, we'll just go off. We're going to have 3 if statements. So if target dot pivot equals null, that's what we're going to do. We're going to do target dot pivot equals target dot game object dot transform, because we're going to have the pivot be the game object the target is on. So the motor scripts are always be on the topmost game object, so it's easy to access. So if we have target dot offset equals null, target dot offset is going to be equal a new game object, and we'll just call this offset. And we will have to get the transform of that game object and assign it to the offset. And finally, we'll do if target dot target camera equals null, we're going to do we're going to do 2 steps here. We're going to go game object, temp.geo equals new game object. We'll call this Moba Camera. And then on this temp.geo, we're going to go, well, first off, we're going to go target camera, and we're going to set this equal to temp.geo dot add component of camera. So we're creating a new camera and putting it on this game object and assigning it to the target. Now, down here, after these 3 ifs, we're going to do the assigning of parents. So target game object, or target camera dot transform dot parent will be equal to target dot offset, and target dot offset dot parent will be equal to target dot pivot. And now to clean up some of this extra stuff, just in case the user messed with these variables, we go target camera dot transform dot local position. It's going to be equal to vector3 dot 0, and target camera dot transform local rotation is going to be quaternion dot identity. So these will zero out all the values and put the target camera right exactly on the offset. So that's how we actually want the setup to work, because the camera is not actually going to move. We're just moving the offset at the pivot. Next, we're going to also do the offset local position, and this is going to be also vector3 0, and we're also going to do the rotation to quaternion identity. Later on, we'll have it so this will update all the values to some default value on the script already, so everything's set up and it looks correct in the editor. But for now, that's all our extra generating code. So we can save this and return to Unity. We can take this, and I'm just going to delete the game object to start fresh. So empty game object, I'm just going to call this Moba pivot. And I'm going to toss the motor on here. So now we have our editor with our fold down, our 3 fields, and our 2 buttons. So we can go auto generate. And there we have it. We got a new camera, an offset, and a pivot. They're all assigned in the correct order over here in the Moba camera, and everything looks good. Now let's do this again. Delete this. This time I'm not going to rename the game object. Just going to toss motor. And then I'm going to do generate from main camera. And now the main camera is in the hierarchy. So everything is there. Cool. So that works how we set it up. So that's going to be all for this tutorial. We set up the basics and started our custom editor and our motor. In the next couple, we'll keep fleshing this out until the motor is fully functional. And we'll also implement couple versions of our input in later videos. So see you guys next time, and hope this video was helpful.